They're held every 2 months by the Scottish Centre for Geopoetics. I'm Norman Bissell, its director, and I'd like to extend a particularly warm welcome to those of you who are taking part in one of our events for the first time. We hope you'll enjoy this session. Geopoetics is the creative expression of the earth and our relationship to it. And today's conversation is about visual arts and geopoetics. We have two professional artists joining us to discuss this. Susannah Rosenfeld-King will give a presentation first, and we will then have breakout groups to discuss gardens and our responses to them. Then Tina Scopa will give her presentation on tuning into plant life in Scotland. And this will be followed by a Q&A and comments directed by yourselves to both artists. I would ask you to mute your microphones during the presentations, but to type in the chat any questions you might have as they occur to you as we go along. The event is being recorded for the benefit of those who can't attend today, but you can turn your video off if you wish, if you don't want your image to be there, other than perhaps a still image. So to begin with Susanna Rosenfeld-King is a painter, photographer, and printmaker who teaches fine art in higher education and is an exhibiting professional artist who is also training to become a therapeutic horticulturalist. And I'm sure we're going to hear more about horticulture in her presentation. Her subject today is grounding art and geopoetics in the garden. Welcome, Susanna, over to you.
That would help if I unmuted myself. Right, I'm just going to share my screen now so that we can start the presentation. So I'm just going to play this. There we go. As I say, I'm training to be, so please don't ask me for any Latin plant names or anything like that. That will come later, maybe in a couple of years. So my talk's in two parts. So I'm going to talk about, there's going to be a presentation relating to my ideas about grounding art and geopoetics in the garden, with some various subsections that you can see on the screen now. And then for the last sort of 10 minutes, we're going to have a breakout room idea where we're going to talk, hopefully some of you have got some images of your own, and then we can discuss gardens, you know, what they mean, and I'll put up a list of sort of suggestions for questions in the chat room. So I'll get started. If it will let me. You know what, it's not going to let me. I'm going to have to go through each individual. Oh no, it is doing it now. Right, good. So I've created sort of, it was first of all a thesis, but I've kind of now worked with a working metaphor of geopoetics. So looking at how we can use geopoetics as our role to behave like in a mycelial way, so that we can enhance, promote our relationships between flora, fauna, humanity through verbal, visual, written works, musical works, through self-led and or community grounded projects and interventions. So Mycelium Works, sort of, it refers to sort of the thread-like body of a fungus, and it's often the unseen network, and it's kind of similar to an underground internet. So it's been connecting all living beings for, from what I've read, 3.5 billion years. So I feel that as a group interested in geopoetics, together we are part of a similar network that explores environmental concerns via art, music, poetry, literature, and so on and so forth. First of all, kind of what is a garden? So to give you a kind of a definition, a communal garden definition, sorry, excuse the pun, A garden is a planned space, usually outdoors, yet set aside for the display, cultivation, or enjoyment of plants and other forms of nature. It's an ideal setting for social or solitary human life. And according to this definition, the single feature identifying even the wildest of wild gardens is control. So, could a garden be David Ryson's patio, which is acrylic on board? Could it be the top centre, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon? Could it be the Magnum photographer Dennis Stock's photograph of Claude Monet's garden? Could it be Adrian Allison's Dig for Victory in St James's Square in London from the Second World War? Could it be my greenhouse? I don't know. Could it be your greenhouse? Who knows? So it could be all of these things. For me, though, I especially enjoy the sort of functionality of a garden. But I kind of also really enjoy when it gradually spills over, it's overrun, and it creates new possibilities. So we've got Peter Bruegel the Younger's Four Seasons, the spring. There's a liquid light image from the wall garden on the Wormsley estate. And then we've got the amazing Virginia Nimikov's Brockwell Park common greenhouses, which for me is a wonderful example of a garden. So as an artist and as someone who likes to depict and my subject matter being gardens, I'm interested in how we use, misuse or neglect gardens. So for me, I suppose gardening is a means of escape and quite often of existing in the moment. And it's the same when I make art, because I can when I'm in a darkroom, exist in a particular moment. So some of the images on the screen are of garden or views from gardens in places where I've lived. A window box in an inner city block, a neglected garden space in an overcrowded metropolitan setting, or it could be a balcony overlooking an elevated urban flyover, or it could be, you know, my current suburban garden setting. And when I make art related to gardens, I use viewfinders to capture an image. And then when I process the image or the photograph, I sometimes tend to create a kind of an interrupted account of the original image. So I create an additional layer sort of to help me sort of create an additional layer of meaning, sort of that is as the consequence of a subterfuge. And I use that subterfuge to confound and beguile the viewer, hopefully, drawing in their attention for longer than usual and encouraging them to linger and examine the image. So the images before you are my garden spaces over the years, hopefully ranging from the balcony or the window box to a fully fledged garden. So continuing on the idea and the theme of subterfuge, here are a group of works by different artists who work with sort of subterfuge. In the centre, we've got a film still from a work by Tony Hill from his 1985 work titled Downside Up. Now, for the duration of the film, the earth seems to be continually flipping over. And in his own words, he says that by the use of a simple camera movement, the work explores and reviews a number of relationships to the ground. I'm not going to be showing the film because there isn't time, I'm afraid. On the left, we have another still from Ivan and Heather Morrison's audio recordings from Global Survey, which is a series of recordings made in 2003 as they travelled the world. And the fundamental way that the Morrisons interacted with their interviewees was via nature, and they had a particular focus on the garden. And then on far right, we have an example of a clawed glass reflection. So we see the garden reflected by a reflection and then framed in a photograph. Here on the screen now, I've got two examples of images taken from my garden. On the left, there's a Cyanotype print that I made in May of this year. And so Cyanotype is often called a sunprint, and it acts in the same way as a photogram does in the darkroom. Objects are placed on a light sensitive surface, and in this instance it's plants, and they're left to expose in the sun, and their presence then becomes imprinted upon the surface. And then on the right is an image of one of my bug hotels in my garden that I've built with my kids. So I want to sort of think about Kenneth White and geopoetics and sort of hopefully ground this in the geopoetics area. So White says that geopoetics is concerned with the cultivation of a life and life-enhancing world by self-developing others. And as White goes on to suggest, our Western philosophical outlook is generally suspended between Aristotle and Plato, between the metaphysics of idealism and of pragmatic reality. So when these two philosophies meet, I kind of feel that they often negate each other's principles. So as White then states, geopoetics goes beyond the division between the intellectual and the sensitive, in which metaphysics is based. So geopoetics engenders an intelligent sensitivity and a sensitive intelligence, end quote. So just as White uses word inversion in his work, so intelligent sensitivity and sensitive intelligence, I too use visual inversion, so to challenge my audience's perception as well as my own. So when we consider the biological makeup of sight, of how we see, the original images that we see before us are upside down, but it's the human brain that has the ability to invert these images via a kind of a corrected neural process. That's my non-scientific view. So I use things like clawed glasses to get reflections, homemade pinhole cameras, camera obscuras. I use pebbles with holes in as viewfinders, or camera lucidas to draw. And then I sort of look at how I can discover an image. I work with it back to front or upside down or via reflection. And working with these tools helps me to re-encounter my subject matter of gardens from an alternative standpoint. So the images on this slide are made with pinhole cameras. So the ones in the center and then on the right, I've included an additional layer onto the printed surface. And then on ones on the right, I have hand coated with silver gelatin emulsion or liquid light. And so once I have my images as negatives, or in the case of cyanotypes, with plant specimens arranged, I then expose them in the darkroom or out in the sunlight. But I find, however precise I may be with my timings in the darkroom or outside in the sunlight, you know, I check the temperatures, I set my timers, there is still a moment of anticipation before the image reveals itself. And so too does gardening hinge upon this a beautiful and unpredictable alchemy. This is the final picture in this section, I think, and I hope. No, there's a couple more as I end on a quote. Here in this image, I've explored a disrupted account of an image. So I have purposely created an additional layer to be read and discerned. But I kind of feel how you read this image is open to interpretation. So for me, it's reminiscent of a film still that is gradually melting or liquefying somehow. That's it, there's these ones. So these images on the screen, I'd like to draw your attention to. On the left, we have a series of photographs of the same garden taken by the artist photographer David Spiro. These works, for me, work as a series similar to how a camera shutter protecting a lens opens and closes over a period of time. But in this instance, it's opening and closing over a period of years. They started in 98 and ended in 2003. And then on the right, we have an oil painting of a garden by the artist John Pearce. And here, the trees form a natural viewfinder that to concentrate yet simultaneously obscure the aspect of the house beyond. And in both works, we are involuntary voyeurs of scenes normally hidden behind closed doors or fences or hedges. And when looking at John Pearce's work, I found a quote which for me, and I think this ends in this section, I'm reading from my notes, I hope you don't mind everyone. He says, so John Pearce says, many of my paintings have been of untended or semi-wild urban gardens, small, fenced-off, owned areas of the planet, offering a sense of closeness to nature and at the same time a remoteness from the world, affecting how we see ourselves and behave in relation to the earth. So for me, this quote and these works of art on this page and on the pages before act as sort of pertinent responses to how gardens and how they can be depicted relate to geopoetics. So moving on, I'm going to start off with a cartoon that came up. It popped up on Facebook last year. So I'll give you a moment to have a read. I think for me, this quote kind of sums up what's been going on over the past year and a half for me personally. But I love that idea that it's seen as a punishment, but actually it may be something that someone wants and enjoys. So the next series of works kind of focus more on the gardening and sort of the mental health aspect. And again, I seem to have taken lots of images from films, artists' films, and here on this slide are two film stills from a film called Bogman Palm Jaguar, and it's by an artist called Luke Fowler, and it's, if you get a chance to have to watch the film, it's absolutely stunning, it's mesmerizing. So the character Bogman, he became distrustful of people and withdrew into nature, but he spent his career working as a conservationist, and he's passionate about the threatened habitat of Scotland's flow country. I'm not necessarily, I've never been there. I've got relatives who live north of there, kind of up in Caithness. But some of you delegates may be aware of the importance of the peat bog land. So, but the character Bogman, he's received a diagnosis of paranoid schizophrenia, and it's this label that greatly impacts his relationship towards others, as well as his relationship towards his surrounding environment. So Bogman takes legal action to remove the label, and I think the film is as much about his search for justice as it is about his garden and the surrounding environment. And the cinematography by Fowler is also accompanied by beautiful evocative field recordings by Lee Patterson. Next, a garden that I think quite a few people will be familiar with, particularly as it's just been saved. These images are from the home of the artist filmmaker Derek Jarman, and Jarman bought the Prospect Cottage in Dungeness in the mid-80s. And the reason why I wanted to include these is that what you'll notice in the images is that this the garden is like a healing and restorative space, and it's right in the face of a nuclear power plant behind. So I think it's really important to include. And also he's has a film, the 1990 film The Garden, which again I would recommend people watch.
Susanna, your time is
20 minutes.
on.
Okay, I've got two more. I'm going to race through. This is a view of Meanwhile Gardens in West London, and it's a view from the Mind Garden, so the charity Mind, and it's a view of Trellick Tower and of the ponds. And these are some liquid light prints. And I do just want one more slide. This is my penultimate slide. I want to include these because these are by the artist Ita Barada. Now, White states that now his quote, "The question is now whether any deep purpose is still possible, whether anything like a real turning of the times is possible." And he says that this is where geopoetics comes in, saying perhaps at the very least it presents itself as a beautiful gesture, a final gesture of sentient human intelligence. And these works are by Ita Barada. There's a film called Beautiful Gesture where she employs three people to save a palm tree because the land's been bought by a developer. And so they plow money in and they spend days saving this solitary palm tree so that the developer can't build. The developer does in the end, but it's perhaps this is just at least a beautiful gesture. So that was my final image of my presentation. And I will stop sharing.
Thank you very much, Susanna.
New life, strange life with a place on their star chart. Dollar store toys as rewards to take